My name is Alexandra Armstrong, and at 35 I have spent my entire life being the family disappointment. The irony is that while my mother Diana paraded my sister Melanie as the golden child, I quietly became the youngest governor in our state's history. For years I kept my success hidden from them, avoiding the dismissal and criticism that had become so familiar. That strategy worked perfectly, until that fateful day in the courtroom when Judge Harrison looked directly at me and said those words that changed everything. "Governor Armstrong, I wasn't informed you would be attending today. Before I tell you how my entire family discovered my secret in the most public way possible, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, and hit that subscribe button if family drama stories speak to your soul." I grew up in a middle-class suburb outside Boston in a colonial-style house with a well-manicured lawn that my mother Diana insisted must always look perfect. Our home was beautiful from the outside, but inside it operated on a clear hierarchy that placed my sister Melanie at the top and me firmly at the bottom. Diana Armstrong was obsessed with appearances and status. She was the type of woman who dressed immaculately for grocery shopping and knew everyone worth knowing in our community. Her laugh was practiced, her smiles measured, and her entire life choreographed to project success and perfection. Nothing mattered more to her than what others thought of our family. My sister Melanie was 3 years younger than me, but might as well have been from another planet. She inherited our mother's striking blue eyes, natural blonde hair, and magnetic charisma. By age 5, she was winning local beauty pageants. By 12, she was the most popular girl in school. Melanie could charm anyone, including our parents, into giving her whatever she wanted. She was beautiful, vivacious, and the center of attention wherever she went. Then there was me. From an early age, I was serious, studious, and focused on achievement rather than attention. I had our father's plain brown hair and quiet demeanor. While Melanie dazzled with her personality, I disappeared into books and academics. I earned straight, as joined debate club, and spent weekends studying while Melanie went to parties. "Alexandra, why can't you be more like your sister?" became the soundtrack of my childhood. When I brought home perfect test scores, my mother would glance at them and say, "That's nice, dear," before turning her attention back to Melanie's latest drama or social triumph. "Nobody likes a know-it-all," she would say, when I excitedly shared something I had learned. "Boys don't want to date the class brain." My father, Timothy, was a successful accountant who worked long hours and avoided conflict at all costs. He wasn't cruel like Diana could be, but his silence was its own form of rejection. When Diana criticized me or compared me to Melanie, he would bury himself deeper in his newspaper or find a reason to check something in the garage. His favorite phrase was, "Listen to your mother, Alexandra." The contrast between how we were treated became more pronounced as we grew older. When I was 14, I spent months researching and applying for a prestigious science competition. The night I won first place, my parents skipped the award ceremony to attend Melanie's dance recital instead. I stood alone on stage, accepting my gold medal while scanning the audience for faces that never appeared. "We're so sorry, Alexandra," my mother said later, not sounding sorry at all, "but you know how important this recital was for Melanie's social development. You're so independent anyway, we knew you'd be fine on your own." That night taught me an important lesson: my achievements would never be priority in my family. If I wanted to celebrate my victories, I would have to do it alone. By high school, the patterns were firmly established. Melanie skipped classes, threw parties when our parents were away, and maintained a C average that Diana always excused as Melanie focusing on her social skills, which are far more important in the real world than grades. Meanwhile, I became editor of the school newspaper, president of the debate club, and was selected for a prestigious statewide student leadership program. My mother's response was to remind me not to get too full of myself, and to ask why I couldn't find time for normal teenage activities. The summer before my senior year, I was accepted into an intensive program at Harvard Law School for exceptional high school students. It was highly competitive with only 20 students selected nationwide. When I showed Diana the acceptance letter, she skimmed it and said, "That sounds boring. Are you sure you want to waste your summer with a bunch of nerds instead of working on your social skills? That summer at Harvard changed my life. For the first time, I was surrounded by people who valued intelligence, ambition, and hard work. My ideas were heard. My achievements celebrated. I met Professor Catherine Lawrence, a constitutional law expert who became the first adult to truly see my potential. "You have a brilliant legal mind, Alexandra," she told me, after I presented my final project. "And more importantly, you have the integrity and vision this country needs in its future leaders." I returned home with a newfound confidence that quickly deflated when I walked through our front door. Melanie had been caught drinking at a party, but somehow the family conversation at dinner was about how I needed to loosen up and live a little like my sister. By the time senior year awards came around, I had resigned myself to celebrating alone. I had been named valedictorian and received a full scholarship to Princeton. At the awards ceremony, I scanned the audience out of habit, not expectation. To my shock, my father was there sitting alone in the back row. He gave me an awkward nod when our eyes met. Later, he patted my shoulder stiffly and said, "Good job, Alexandra. Your mother and I are. Well, I'm proud of you." Then he cleared his throat and added, "Melanie had an important callback for a modeling opportunity. Your mother took her shopping for it." It wasn't much, but it was the first time anyone in my family had acknowledged my achievements. That small moment sustained me through the summer as I prepared to leave for college, and though I didn't know it, then begin my real life away from my family's shadow. Princeton welcomed me with open arms that August. I arrived on campus with 2 suitcases and a heart full of hope. Diana and Timothy dropped me off, with minimal fanfare, my mother checking her watch repeatedly and reminding me they needed to get back home because Melanie has an important audition tomorrow. As they pulled away, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. For the first time in my life, I could just be Alexandra, not Melanie's plain sister, or the boring one. My roommate Elizabeth Cooper took one look at my meager belongings and declared we were going shopping to properly outfit my side of the room. "College is about reinvention," she announced as we walked through Target. "Who do you want to be, Alexandra Armstrong?" I had never been asked that question before. Who did I want to be? Not who should I be to gain my mother's approval, or how could I be more like Melanie? Just, who was I? "I want to be someone who makes a difference," I said finally. "Someone who matters." Elizabeth, a political science major from Chicago, with fierce intelligence and zero tolerance for pretense, became my first real friend. She introduced me to her study group, dragged me to social events when I tried to hide in the library, and taught me that intelligence and sociability weren't mutually exclusive. My academic excellence continued at Princeton, but now it flourished in an environment that celebrated it. Professors noticed my thoughtful contributions in class. Study partners sought me out for my clear explanations and analytical skills. I discovered a passion for public policy, fascinated by how the right legislation could transform communities and improve lives. The phone calls home became an exercise in invisibility. Every Sunday evening, I would dutifully call, and every Sunday, the conversation would follow the same pattern. "Hi, Mom. How is everyone?" "Oh, Alexandra, you won't believe what happened with Melanie this week." 20 minutes of Melanie updates would follow, with occasional interjections from my father in the background. When Diana finally paused for breath, she might ask, "How are your classes?" only to interrupt my response with another Melanie anecdote. My visits home became increasingly uncomfortable. Thanksgiving of freshman year, I arrived with stories of my internship application to the State Department and my selection for the prestigious Wilson Policy Fellowship. Diana listened for approximately 30 seconds before turning to Melanie. "Tell Alexandra about your exciting news." Melanie's exciting news was that she had dropped out of community college after 1 semester because she had been discovered by a talent agent who promised to make her a star. This agent, a slick man named Brad, with a fake tan and slicker smile, had convinced her to invest most of her savings in professional headshots and acting classes at his studio. When I gently suggested she research the agency's credentials, Diana snapped. Not everyone needs to overthink everything, Alexandra. Melanie has natural talent and instinct. She follows her heart, not just her head. By sophomore year, I had stopped sharing my accomplishments with my family entirely. What was the point? My Dean's List status, my published research paper, my selection for a competitive summer program in Washington, D.C. all went unmentioned during our brief phone calls. It was during that summer in D.C. that I met James Harrington, a law student from Georgetown, who was interning at the same think tank. James was brilliant, ambitious, and the first man who seemed genuinely interested in my mind as well as my company. Our relationship developed over policy discussions and late-night debates about constitutional interpretation. You think like a natural legislator, he told me one evening, as we walked along the Potomac. The way you analyze problems and build consensus, you could really make change happen in this country. For my 21st birthday, James drove up to Princeton to surprise me. He suggested we visit my family that weekend so he could meet them. Despite my reluctance, I agreed, hoping that perhaps with James by my side my family might see me differently. That weekend was a disaster. Diana fawned over James flirting inappropriately and repeatedly mentioning how surprised she was that I had found such a handsome, charming boyfriend. Melanie, whose entertainment career had predictably failed to materialize, spent the entire visit trying to capture James's attention. The breaking point came at dinner when Diana said, "James, you seem so accomplished and ambitious. What do you see in our Alexandra? She's always been the serious, boring one." James looked confused. "Alexandra is the most brilliant person I know. Her professors say she could be running the country someday." Diana laughed, as if he'd told a hilarious joke. "Our Alexandra, in politics? Oh, that's precious. She doesn't have the personality for it, not like Melanie." In the car driving back to Princeton, James was uncharacteristically quiet. 2 weeks later, he ended our relationship, saying he wasn't ready for something serious. But I knew the truth. He had seen the dynamic with my family and didn't want any part of it. I couldn't blame him. That breakup catalyzed something in me. I threw myself into my studies with renewed determination. If my family couldn't see my worth, I would build a life so undeniably successful that their opinion wouldn't matter. I applied and was accepted to Harvard Law School, following in the footsteps of my mentor, Professor Lawrence. Law school was both brutally challenging and incredibly affirming. I thrived under the pressure, graduating in the top 5% of my class. I clerked for a federal judge, worked at the district attorney's office, and began building a network of mentors and colleagues who respected my intellect and drive. Throughout these years, my contact with family dwindled to obligatory holiday calls and rare visits. Diana continued to bail Melanie out of various crises, from failed business ventures to relationship disasters. My father retreated further into his passive role, occasionally calling me separately to ask stiff, formal questions about my career that indicated he had no real understanding of what I did. My emotional distance from my family grew in proportion to my professional success. I built a surrogate family of friends and mentors who celebrated my victories and supported me through challenges. Elizabeth remained my closest friend, now working as a political strategist in Boston, and constantly encouraging me to consider running for office. "You have everything it takes, Alex," she insisted during one of our weekly calls. "The brilliance, the compassion, the work ethic. People like you are supposed to be in public service." When I was 28, I finally took her advice. I volunteered for a state Senate campaign, quickly moving from stuffing envelopes to drafting policy positions. The candidate, Senator Margaret Chen, recognized my talent and took me under her wing. When she won, she offered me a position as her legislative director. That role became the launching pad for my political career, though I had no idea at the time just how far it would take me. My work for Senator Chen opened doors I never imagined possible. As her legislative director, I crafted policies that actually improved people's lives. We expanded healthcare access for children, strengthened environmental protections, and created job training programs that revitalized struggling communities. For the first time, I saw how my analytical skills and policy knowledge could translate into tangible benefits for real people. After 2 years, Senator Chen encouraged me to step out from behind the scenes. "Alexandra, you're the one who should be running for office," she told me over coffee one morning. "You have the vision, the intellect, and surprisingly good political instincts for someone who overthinks everything." I laughed at her gentle teasing, but the idea had taken root. When a state representative seat opened up in a district near where I lived, I decided to run. The campaign was grueling, exhilarating, and terrifying all at once. I knocked on thousands of doors, attended countless community meetings, and worked 18-hour days while learning the art of connecting with voters. To my surprise, I discovered I was good at it. Not in the flashy, charismatic way that came naturally to Melanie, but in a thoughtful, authentic manner that resonated with constituents tired of empty promises. I listened to their concerns, offered substantive solutions, and never talked down to them. People responded to my genuine interest in their lives and my detailed understanding of the issues affecting them. When I won the election, I called my parents, foolishly hoping that this achievement might finally earn their approval. My father answered, sounding distracted. "That's nice, Alexandra," he said after I shared my news. "Hold on, your mother wants to talk to you." Diana came on the line, barely acknowledging my victory, before launching into the latest Melanie crisis. My sister had started a boutique that was failing spectacularly, leaving her with massive debt. "We had to refinance the house to help her," Diana explained. "Now that you have this government job with a stable salary, perhaps you could contribute something to help your sister." I was stunned into silence. Not a word of congratulations, not a hint of pride, just another request to clean up Melanie's mess. I politely declined, explaining that state representatives didn't actually make that much money, and ended the call feeling hollow. Despite my family's indifference, my political career flourished. I became known for my policy expertise, work ethic, and integrity. I sponsored successful legislation on education reform, infrastructure investment, and government transparency. When I ran for re-election, I won by a landslide. My work required such intense focus that it became easy to further distance myself from family interactions. I missed holiday gatherings due to legislative sessions. I sent gifts rather than attending birthday celebrations. Diana occasionally called to complain about my absence, but these conversations invariably turned to Melanie's latest drama or accomplishment. "Your sister is dating a doctor now," she would say. Or, "Melanie is starting a new business venture. That sounds very promising." The fact that most of Melanie's relationships ended disastrously, or that her business ventures consistently failed, never seemed to dampen Diana's enthusiasm for her potential. Meanwhile, my actual accomplishments were treated as curiosities at best, liabilities at worst. 3 years into my term as state representative, I was approached about running for state senate. The incumbent was retiring, and party leadership saw me as a strong candidate who could keep the seat. I hesitated, knowing the increased visibility would make it harder to maintain the separation between my professional and family lives. "You can't keep hiding your light," Alexandra Elizabeth told me when I confided my concerns. "You're doing important work. Your family's approval or disapproval doesn't change that." I decided to run and won a competitive primary and general election. At 32, I became the youngest state senator in our state's history, though this milestone went uncelebrated by the people who had raised me. That Christmas, feeling a responsibility to at least make an appearance, I drove to my parents' house with carefully selected gifts and a resolution to keep conversations light. The evening started pleasantly enough, with my father asking general questions about my work that I answered vaguely. Diana seemed almost friendly, until she'd had a few glasses of wine. "So, Alexandra," she said as we sat in the living room after dinner, "I heard from Caroline Wilson that you're considering running for governor next year. Please tell me that's just a rumor." I was startled. I had indeed been in preliminary discussions with party leaders about a potential gubernatorial run, but nothing had been announced publicly. "I'm exploring several options for continuing my public service," I answered carefully. Diana laughed, that dismissive sound I knew so well. Oh, Alexandra, always so ambitious. Don't you think you're being a little delusional? Governor is for serious politicians, not idealistic girls playing government. I am a serious politician, Mother, I replied, keeping my voice steady despite the familiar sting of her words. Well, I think it's wonderful that you found something to occupy your time, she said, patting my hand condescendingly, but perhaps focus on something more attainable. Maybe help your sister with her new wellness center instead. She could use someone with your organizational skills. I looked to my father hoping for some support, but he was suddenly very interested in the basketball game playing on mute in the background. Actually, Melanie chimed in, the wellness center is going to be huge. I have investors ready to commit once I finalize the business plan. That was the first I'd heard of any wellness center, but it followed the familiar pattern of Melanie's ventures: grand plans, vague details, and inevitable financial disaster. I left earlier than planned that night, driving home through a light snowfall with my mother's words echoing in my head. Delusional. Playing government. The familiar doubt crept in the voice that whispered, I would never be good enough, never be worthy of their approval. But something was different now. As I drove, I found myself thinking not about my family's opinion, but about the single mother I'd helped navigate the bureaucracy to get health care for her children, the elderly veteran whose pension I'd fought to protect, the students in previously underfunded schools who now had access to technology and advanced courses because of legislation I had championed. By the time I reached my apartment, I had made my decision. I would run for governor not to prove anything to my family, but because I genuinely believed I could make a difference for my state. And this time, I wouldn't seek my family's approval or even their acknowledgement. I would keep my political life and my family life completely separate. The next morning, I called the party chairperson and told her I was in. The gubernatorial campaign was about to begin, and it would change everything, though not in the way I expected. The decision to run for governor wasn't one I made lightly. At 33, I would be one of the youngest candidates in state history, and certainly the youngest woman. I knew the campaign would be brutal, with opponents questioning my experience, my qualifications, and likely my gender. What I didn't anticipate was how liberating it would feel to pursue this goal without seeking my family's approval. My campaign team was small, but dedicated, led by Elizabeth, who took a leave of absence from her consulting firm to serve as my campaign manager. We were outspent, outmanned, and initially dismissed by the political establishment. The incumbent Lieutenant Governor Bradley Hamilton was considered the frontrunner, with name recognition party backing and a massive war chest. They're underestimating you, Elizabeth said, after a particularly dismissive article appeared in the state newspaper. We'll use that to our advantage. We ran a different kind of campaign. While Hamilton held expensive fundraisers with wealthy donors, I hosted town halls in community centers, libraries, and school gymnasiums across the state. I listened more than I spoke. I answered questions directly and honestly, even when the answers weren't politically convenient. I released detailed policy proposals rather than vague promises. Slowly, something remarkable began to happen. Crowds at our events grew larger. Volunteers joined our campaign. Small donations poured in from ordinary citizens who connected with our message of practical, progressive governance focused on improving people's daily lives. The media began paying attention when our polling numbers crept up. Armstrong surge surprises political insiders, read one headline, Dark Horse Candidate Gains Ground in Governor's Race, proclaimed another. Hamilton's campaign responded with attacks on my youth and inexperience. His surrogates questioned whether a childless career woman could understand family values. One particularly nasty ad implied I was a radical who would destroy the state's economy with socialist policies. Rather than responding in kind, I invited Hamilton to a series of debates focused on substantive issues. To everyone's surprise, including mine, he accepted. Those debates became the turning point of the campaign. Hamilton was polished and prepared, with rehearsed talking points, but struggled with detailed policy questions. I came armed with facts, figures, and specific plans. When he attacked, I stayed focused on the issues that actually mattered to voters. The contrast couldn't have been clearer. After the final debate, the state's largest newspaper endorsed me, calling me a rare political talent who combines intellectual heft with genuine compassion and pragmatic vision. Throughout this whirlwind, I maintained absolute silence with my family about my campaign. When Diana called with updates about Melanie's latest drama, I listened politely and offered non-committal responses about my own life. Work is busy, I would say. I'm focusing on some important projects. It wasn't difficult to keep my political profile hidden from them. Diana and Timothy never followed state politics, and they certainly never Googled me. Melanie lived in her own self-centered world, where my activities were irrelevant unless they directly affected her. None of them watched the news channels, where I occasionally appeared, read the newspapers that covered my campaign, or moved in circles where state politics was discussed. Election night arrived with the polls showing a dead heat. My team gathered at a hotel downtown, watching results trickle in from across the state. Early returns favored Hamilton in the wealthy suburbs, but I performed strongly in urban centers and rural communities, where my economic message had resonated. By midnight, the race was still too close to call. Elizabeth advised me to get some rest, but I was too wired, too invested in every precinct report. We huddled around computer screens, analyzing turnout patterns and remaining counties. At 3:42 a.m., the Associated Press called the race. Alexandra Armstrong would be the next governor, winning by approximately 22,000 votes, out of nearly 2 million cast. The hotel ballroom erupted in cheers, with campaign staff embracing and crying. Elizabeth hugged me fiercely, whispering, "You did it, Governor. You actually did it." In that moment of triumph, I felt a strange emptiness where family congratulations should have been. I had achieved something extraordinary, defied all expectations, and there was no one from my childhood to witness it. No proud parents, no supportive siblings, just colleagues, friends, and supporters who had known me only as the determined, capable politician, not as the perpetually disappointing daughter. The inauguration 2 months later was a blur of ceremonial duties, speeches, and administrative transitions. Elizabeth had organized everything beautifully, from the simple, elegant ceremony to the reception focusing on local businesses and artisans. I wore a tailored navy suit, took the oath of office with my hand on the state constitution, and delivered an inaugural address focused on unity, opportunity, and common purpose. The crowd that day included former teachers, college friends, political mentors, and thousands of citizens who had supported my unlikely campaign. But not my mother, not my father, not my sister. I had sent formal invitations, of course, but received polite regrets, claiming prior commitments. It stung, but I refused to let their absence diminish the importance of the day. My first 6 months as governor were exactly as challenging as I had expected. I assembled a diverse, talented cabinet, worked with the legislature to pass an ambitious budget, and launched initiatives on education, healthcare, and economic development. The job consumed nearly every waking hour, which suited me perfectly. Work had always been my refuge from family disappointment. Elizabeth, now my chief of staff, was the only one who dared broach the subject of my family estrangement. "Have you thought about reaching out to them, Alex?" she asked one evening as we reviewed briefing documents. "Letting them know what you've accomplished?" "What would be the point?" I replied, not looking up from my papers. My mother would find some way to dismiss it or make it about Melanie. My father would nod awkwardly and change the subject. "Maybe," Elizabeth said gently. "Or maybe they'd surprise you. People sometimes rise to the occasion when given the chance." I changed the subject, unwilling to indulge the fantasy that my family might suddenly value my achievements after 3 decades of indifference. 3 weeks later, the decision was taken out of my hands. My secretary Jennifer interrupted a budget meeting with an urgent message. "Governor, I'm sorry to disturb you, "But there's a situation requiring your immediate attention," she said, handing me a folder. "Your sister has been arrested." I opened the folder to find a police report detailing Melanie's arrest for fraud and embezzlement. Apparently her wellness center had been less about wellness and more about collecting investor money that mysteriously disappeared. Several prominent local business people had filed complaints triggering an investigation. The district attorney was proceeding with charges, and Melanie's arraignment was scheduled for the following week. The folder included a confidential note from the DA, informing me as a courtesy given my position and relationship to the defendant. My first instinct was to recuse myself completely from any involvement. As governor, I had no direct authority over the district attorney's office or the courts, but even the appearance of interference would be inappropriate. Yet I couldn't ignore that this was my sister, despite our complicated relationship. After careful consideration and consultation with my legal counsel, I decided on a course of action that maintained both ethical boundaries and basic family obligation. I would attend the arraignment as a private citizen, not in my official capacity. I would make no contact with the judge or prosecutors. I would simply be present, observing like any other member of the public. What I didn't anticipate was that this decision would lead to the most dramatic family confrontation of my life, in the most public setting imaginable. The morning of Melanie's arraignment, I dressed carefully in civilian clothes, jeans, a simple blouse, and a cardigan, with minimal makeup, and my hair pulled back in a ponytail. I wanted to blend in to be just another spectator in the courtroom, not the governor of the state. My security detail was unhappy with the arrangement, but adapted sending just 2 plainclothes officers who would remain inconspicuous in the courthouse. I arrived early, slipping in through a side entrance and taking a seat in the back row of the courtroom. Few people looked twice at me, without the usual trappings of my office. The courtroom gradually filled with the day's scheduled cases, mostly tired-looking defendants and their lawyers waiting for their moment before the judge. I spotted my parents entering about 15 minutes before Melanie's scheduled appearance. Diana looked immaculate as always, though strain showed in the tightness around her eyes. Timothy followed behind her shoulders, slumped in his characteristic posture of resignation. They sat near the front, not noticing me in the back row. A few minutes later, a side door opened, and Melanie appeared escorted by her attorney, a sharp-looking woman in an expensive suit. My sister looked thinner than when I had last seen her, her usual, confident demeanor replaced by visible anxiety. Judge William Harrison presided that morning, a reputation for no-nonsense efficiency preceding him. He moved quickly through the docket, showing neither undue harshness nor particular leniency to the defendants before him. When the clerk called Commonwealth versus Melanie Armstrong, my sister and her attorney approached the bench. The prosecutor, a young man with neatly combed hair and a crisp blue suit, stood as well. "Your Honor, the defendant is charged with 3 counts of fraud and 2 counts of embezzlement related to the solicitation of investment funds for a business enterprise that appears to have been primarily a vehicle for personal enrichment." The prosecutor outlined the allegations that Melanie had collected over $500,000 from investors for a wellness center that never materialized, using the funds instead for luxury purchases, travel, and to pay off previous debts. As he spoke, I noticed Diana becoming increasingly agitated, whispering urgently to Timothy, and then to Melanie's attorney. Judge Harrison noticed too, fixing my mother with a stern look. "Madam, please refrain from disrupting these proceedings." Diana, unaccustomed to being addressed in such a manner, straightened indignantly. "I'm the defendant's mother, Your Honor, and there's been a terrible misunderstanding. My daughter is a respected businesswoman who simply encountered unexpected obstacles in launching her wellness center." Judge Harrison's expression hardened. "Madam, this is an arraignment, not a trial. You will have ample opportunity to support your daughter appropriately, but interrupting court proceedings is not one of them. Please sit down, or I will have you removed." Diana subsided, looking shocked at being spoken to so firmly. I almost felt sorry for her, She had spent decades creating a reality where Melanie could do no wrong, and now found herself in a world where that carefully constructed narrative held no power. The proceedings continued with the judge, asking Melanie how she pleaded. "Not guilty, Your Honor," she said, her voice smaller than I had ever heard it. The prosecutor requested bail be set at $100,000, citing flight risk due to Melanie's history of unstable residence and employment. Her attorney argued for release on personal recognizance, emphasizing Melanie's community ties. I watched silently from my seat, torn between sympathy for my sister and recognition that she needed to face consequences for her actions. This pattern of behavior, enabled by our parents for decades, had finally reached its inevitable conclusion. As Judge Harrison considered the bail argument, one of the court officers approached the bench and whispered something to him. The judge's eyebrows rose slightly as he glanced toward the back of the courtroom, his eyes finding me with surprising accuracy, despite my attempt to blend in. The moment that changed everything happened next, as Judge Harrison looked directly at me and said clearly, "Governor Armstrong, I wasn't informed you would be attending today. While this is a public proceeding, it would have been customary to notify the court of your presence." The courtroom fell into absolute silence. Every head turned toward me, faces registering shock, confusion, or sudden recognition. Diana's mouth literally dropped open, her perfectly composed facade crumbling as she stared at me in disbelief. Timothy looked as though someone had struck him, while Melanie's already pale face went completely white. "I'm here as a private citizen, Your Honor," I replied, my voice steady, despite the thundering of my heart. "My presence is personal, not official." Judge Harrison nodded. "Nevertheless, the court acknowledges your attendance. We will proceed with appropriate protocol." What he meant, of course, was that he would be especially careful to demonstrate that neither favoritism nor prejudice would affect his handling of a case involving the governor's sister. His professionalism was impeccable, but the damage, or perhaps the revelation, was done. Diana had recovered enough to turn fully in her seat, staring at me with an expression that cycled rapidly between shock, confusion, and something that looked almost like betrayal. Melanie stood frozen beside her attorney, while Timothy seemed to be trying to make himself invisible, a skill he had perfected over decades of family conflict. The judge continued the proceedings, setting bail at $50,000, and scheduling a preliminary hearing for the following month. Throughout an undercurrent of tension, and whispers rippled through the courtroom, I remained seated, maintaining my composure despite feeling completely exposed. When the proceedings concluded, I stood to leave, planning to exit through the side door before any confrontation could occur. I wasn't quick enough. Diana intercepted me at the end of the row, her eyes wild with confusion and anger. "Governor Armstrong," she hissed loud enough for nearby people to hear. "What kind of game are you playing, Alexandra? When were you going to tell us?" Before I could respond, a reporter who had been covering the day's court proceedings approached, recognition dawning on his face. "Governor Armstrong, are you here in connection with the fraud case against Melanie Armstrong? Is there a personal relationship?" More reporters materialized, sensing a story. My security detail moved closer, their casual demeanor shifting to alert protectiveness. "The defendant is my sister," I acknowledged, knowing denial would only fuel speculation. "I attended today as a family member, not in my official capacity. I have no further comment on an ongoing legal matter." Diana looked as though I had slapped her. "Sister, you acknowledge her as your sister, but kept this secret from us. How could you?" The courtroom had become a circus, with reporters recording every word and curious onlookers gathering. My security detail had enough closing ranks around me. "Ma'am, we need to move you to a secure location," the lead officer said quietly but firmly. I nodded, turning to Diana. "This isn't the place for this conversation. I'll meet you privately." As my security team escorted me toward a private exit, I caught a glimpse of Melanie being led away by her attorney, her expression unreadable. Timothy stood alone in the middle of the chaos, looking lost, and suddenly very old. The courthouse revelation had torn away the careful separation I had maintained between my family life and my public role. Now these worlds would collide in ways I couldn't predict or control, and there was no going back to the comfortable distance I had created. The scene outside the courthouse was chaos. Word had spread rapidly that the governor's sister was facing fraud charges, and the press had materialized like sharks, sensing blood in the water. Camera crews set up on the courthouse steps. Reporters spoke urgently into microphones, and curious onlookers gathered to witness the unfolding drama. My security detail, now fully engaged in protective mode, hurried me toward a side exit where an unmarked SUV waited. As we moved through the corridor, I could hear the commotion from the main hallway where my family was presumably dealing with the same media frenzy. "Governor, we should return to the Capitol," immediately said Michael, my head of security. "This situation is volatile and unpredictable." I stopped walking. "Number, I need to speak with my family. Can you secure a private room here in the courthouse?" Michael looked unhappy but nodded. "We can request the use of a conference room, but I strongly advise against prolonging your presence here." "Noted," I replied. "Please make the arrangements and have someone bring my parents and sister there if she's been released." 20 minutes later, I sat alone in a small conference room waiting for my family to arrive. I had called Elizabeth to brief her on the situation, and she was already managing the media response, issuing a brief statement confirming my relationship to the defendant while emphasizing the independence of the judicial process. The door opened, and Diana burst in first, her composure completely abandoned. Timothy followed, looking shell-shocked, with Melanie and her attorney trailing behind. "Would you prefer I stay for this conversation, Miss Armstrong?" the attorney asked Melanie. "No, Rachel. This is family, Melanie," replied her voice tight. "But don't go far." As the door closed behind the attorney, Diana exploded. Governor, how could you keep something like this from your own family? Were you laughing at us all this time, Alexandra? Enjoying your little secret, while we remained ignorant?" I took a deep breath, determined to remain calm. "I wasn't laughing at anyone, Mother. My political career has been public information. I've been in the news, appeared in debates, given speeches. It wasn't a secret, just something you never bothered to notice." "Don't you dare turn this around on us," Diana snapped. "You deliberately kept us in the dark about your position. Your own father didn't even know his daughter was the governor of our state." Timothy, who had been silent until now, finally spoke. "Why, Alexandra? Why didn't you tell us?" His question, asked without accusation, penetrated my defenses in a way Diana's anger couldn't, in a neuter. I looked at my father, really looked at him, and saw genuine confusion and hurt in his eyes. "Because it wouldn't have mattered," I said quietly. "Or worse, it would have only mattered because of the title, not because of what I've accomplished or the work I've done." "That's absurd," Diana protested. "Of course we would have been proud." "Would you?" I asked, years of suppressed emotion finally surfacing. "When I was elected to the state legislature, I called to tell you. You spent 2 minutes acknowledging it before turning the conversation to Melanie's latest crisis. When I was elected to the state senate, you asked if I could use my position to help with Melanie's parking tickets. You've spent my entire life dismissing my achievements as boring or unimportant." "That's not true," Diana insisted, though her eyes flickered with uncertainty. "It is true," I continued, my voice steady. "When I told you I was considering running for governor, you called me delusional. You said it was for serious politicians, not idealistic girls playing government. Those were your exact words, Mother." Diana flushed, clearly remembering the conversation. "I was just trying to protect you from disappointment." "No. You were doing what you've always done, diminishing me while elevating Melanie. So I stopped seeking your approval. I built my career, ran my campaign, and won the election, without your support or acknowledgement. And you know what? It was liberating." Melanie, who had been unusually quiet, finally spoke. "So, this was all about getting back at us, becoming governor to prove us wrong." I turned to my sister, feeling a surprising surge of compassion despite everything. "No, Melanie. This had nothing to do with any of you. I became governor because I cared deeply about public service and believed I could make a positive difference for our state. My decision not to share it with you was about self-preservation, not revenge. So why are you here today? Melanie demanded. Come to gloat over my misfortune. Use your power to make sure I go to prison. Is that really what you think of me? I asked, genuinely hurt by the accusation. I'm here because despite everything, you're my sister. I wanted to understand what happened and see if there was an appropriate way I could support you, not by interfering with the legal process, which I would never do, but as a family member. If you really wanted to help, you could make this all go away, Diana interjected. Surely the governor has that kind of influence. I stared at my mother in disbelief. That's exactly why I kept my position separate from my family life. What you're suggesting would be not just unethical, but illegal. I took an oath to uphold the laws of this state, not to subvert them for personal benefit. So, you'll do nothing while your sister goes to jail, Diana pressed. I'll do nothing to interfere with a legitimate legal proceeding, I clarified firmly. That doesn't mean I can't support Melanie in appropriate ways. I can help her find excellent legal representation. I can encourage her to cooperate fully and demonstrate genuine remorse. I can be present for her as a sister. What I cannot and will not do is abuse my position to get her special treatment. The room fell silent as my words sank in. Timothy looked thoughtful while Diana seemed caught between anger and a dawning realization that her usual manipulation tactics wouldn't work. Melanie's reaction surprised me most. She sank into a chair, the defiance draining from her posture. You really are the governor, she said quietly, as if the reality was only now becoming concrete for her. Yes, I replied simply. And you won't use your position to help me avoid consequences? Number. Melanie nodded slowly. That's actually respectable. She looked up at me, really seeing me perhaps for the first time. I always thought you were the boring one, the rule follower. But you've been building something real while I've been chasing shortcuts and easy money. Diana wasn't ready to concede. This is ridiculous. Family helps family, Alexandra. That's what we do. No, Mother, I said, standing my ground. What you've done is enable Melanie's worst impulses her entire life. You've bailed her out of every consequence, excused every mistake, and convinced her that rules don't apply to her. Where has that led to fraud charges and potential prison time? Diana gasped, but I continued before she could interrupt. Real support means helping people grow and learn, not protecting them from the natural consequences of their actions. I can support Melanie through this process, but I won't interfere with it. Timothy stepped forward, placing a restraining hand on Diana's arm as she prepared to launch another attack. Diana, stop. Just stop for a moment and listen. He turned to me, his expression, a complex mixture of regret and something that looked almost like pride. I owe you an apology, Alexandra. Many apologies, actually. I've failed you as a father in so many ways. His unexpected words left me momentarily speechless. In all my imagined scenarios of this confrontation, I had never anticipated genuine contrition from either parent. You achieved all of this completely on your own, he continued. Without our encouragement or support. That speaks volumes about your character and determination, and about our failings as parents. Diana looked betrayed by Timothy's words, but something in his tone kept her from interrupting. I'd like to meet with Melanie alone, I said after a moment. Just the two of us. Diana began to protest, but Timothy took her arm firmly. Come on, Diana. Let them talk. He guided my reluctant mother toward the door, pausing to look back at me. For what it's worth, Alexandra, I am extremely proud of what you've accomplished. I just wish I had been part of it. When they left, Melanie and I sat in silence for a long moment. The sister I had spent a lifetime competing with, resenting, and eventually avoiding, now looked small and vulnerable, nothing like the golden child who had dominated our family dynamic. So what happens now? She finally asked. Now you face the charges honestly, I replied. You get good legal representation, cooperate with the investigation, and take responsibility for your actions. And then what? Prison? That depends on many factors, including how much money can be recovered for the investors. But Melanie, this doesn't have to define the rest of your life. It can be a turning point instead of an end point. She looked skeptical. Easy for you to say. You're the governor with the perfect life. I laughed, surprising both of us. My life is far from perfect. I work 14-hour days, face constant criticism, and until today had no relationship with my family. But I have purpose, and that matters more than perfection. We talked for another hour, having the first real conversation of our adult lives. Melanie revealed the desperate financial situation that had led to her fraudulent actions, and I shared stories of my political journey. We didn't resolve everything, not even close, but we laid the groundwork for something new to grow from the ashes of our dysfunctional past. By the time we emerged from the conference room, the media presence had grown exponentially. Reporters shouted questions as my security detail created a path through the crowd. Rather than fleeing, I made a split-second decision to address them directly. I will make a brief statement, I announced, stepping up to the impromptu press line. Melanie stood slightly behind me, looking uncertain but present. Today I attended my sister Melanie Armstrong's arraignment as a family member, not in my official capacity as governor. While I acknowledge our relationship, I want to be absolutely clear that the judicial process will proceed without any interference. Miss Armstrong will receive exactly the same treatment under the law as any other citizen of our state. I paused, then added, on a personal note, I believe in both justice and compassion. I believe in accountability and redemption. These are not contradictory values, but complementary ones that form the foundation of both our legal system and our human relationships. Thank you. As we moved toward the exit, a reporter called out, Governor Armstrong, why did you keep your family in the dark about your position? I turned back briefly. Some journeys need to be walked alone before they can be shared. Today marks a new chapter for my family, one of honesty, and perhaps in time healing. With those words, I left the courthouse, having finally broken the silence that had both protected and isolated me for so long. The path forward was uncertain, but for the first time it included the possibility of a genuine relationship with my family built on truth rather than pretense. 6 months after the courthouse revelation, I stood at the window of my office in the governor's mansion, watching autumn leaves dance across the lawn. So much had changed since that day, when Judge Harrison inadvertently exposed my carefully guarded secret. Melanie had pleaded guilty to reduced charges after agreeing to cooperate fully with investigators and make restitution to her investors. Her sentence included probation, community service, and mandatory financial counseling. The judge had noted her genuine remorse and lack of prior criminal record in his relatively lenient sentencing. What surprised me most was how Melanie had embraced her rehabilitation. She was working at a nonprofit that provided job training for women, re-entering the workforce after incarceration, bringing her natural charisma and people skills to a worthy cause. Twice monthly, we met for therapy sessions, with Dr. Rachel Weber, working through the tangled childhood dynamics that had shaped both our self-perceptions and our relationship. I spent my whole life believing I was special. Melanie had confessed during one particularly emotional session. Mom made me feel like the rules didn't apply to me, like I was entitled to success without effort. I never developed any resilience because I never had to face consequences. And I spent my life believing I was inherently inadequate. I had responded that no achievement would ever be enough to make me worthy of attention or approval. Dr. Weber had helped us see how Diana's parenting had damaged us both, albeit in different ways. Melanie had been set up for failure through excessive praise and protection, while I had been driven to overachievement by conditional acceptance that never actually arrived. Diana herself was on a slower, more reluctant journey toward self-awareness. After the initial shock of the courthouse scene, she had retreated into angry denial, refusing to acknowledge her role in our family dysfunction. It was Timothy who surprised us all by initiating change. I enabled your mother's favoritism for decades, he admitted during a difficult family dinner, 3 months after the courthouse incident. I saw what was happening to both of you girls, and I did nothing. That makes me equally responsible. His honesty had cracked something open in our family dynamic. Diana still struggled to accept criticism or admit mistakes, but she had begun making small efforts. She had attended 2 family therapy sessions before declaring it unnecessary, but even that limited participation had yielded some insights. Last month she had called me directly for the first time in years. Our conversation was awkward but represented progress. I saw your speech on education funding on the news, she said stiffly. You spoke very well. Coming from Diana, this qualified as effusive praise. Thank you, Mother, I had replied, accepting the olive branch for what it was. A knock at my office door pulled me from my reflections. Jennifer entered with a stack of briefing papers. The Budget Committee members will be here in 20 minutes, Governor, she reminded me. And your sister called. She confirmed dinner at her place tonight, at 7. I smiled, still adjusting to the novelty of having regular family dinners on my calendar. Thank you, Jennifer. The dinner that evening was at Melanie's modest new apartment, a far cry from the luxury condos she had once inhabited on borrowed money. Timothy arrived carrying a homemade lasagna, while Diana brought an expensive bottle of wine and barely concealed judgment about Melanie's transitional living situation. This neighborhood has potential, she said, in what for her was remarkable restraint. Melanie's 12-year-old daughter Sophia, who lived primarily with her father but stayed with Melanie on weekends, helped serve the meal. The girl had always been somewhat in awe of me, but lately that awe had transformed into something closer to admiration. Aunt Alexandra, can I interview you for my school project? She asked as we ate. We're supposed to talk to someone whose job helps the community. She's very busy, Sophia, Diana interjected automatically. I'm sure she doesn't have time for school projects. In the past, I would have accepted this dismissal silently. Tonight I set down my fork and looked directly at my mother. Actually, I'd be honored to help with Sophia's project, I said firmly. Public service is about being accessible to all constituents, especially young people who represent our future. Diana blinked, unused to being contradicted, but nodded after a moment. Of course. I just meant you have such a demanding schedule. I always have time for family, I replied the words, feeling both foreign and right in my mouth. Sophia beamed. Mom says you're her role model now, she confided, ignoring Melanie's embarrassed Sophia from across the table. Your mom is my role model for growth and courage, I responded, meeting Melanie's eyes with genuine affection. She's showing incredible strength right now. Later, as Timothy and I washed dishes, while Diana helped Sophia with homework, and Melanie took a work call, my father spoke quietly. You know I've spent 40 years avoiding difficult conversations, he said carefully, drying a wine glass. I thought I was keeping the peace, but I was really just preserving a harmful status quo. It's never too late to change, Dad. I replied, the term still feeling new on my tongue, after years of the more formal father. He nodded. I watch you as governor making tough decisions every day, facing criticism, standing your ground when necessary. I wonder where you got that courage, because it certainly wasn't from me. Maybe it was, I suggested. Maybe watching you avoid conflict all those years taught me the cost of silence. He considered this. Sometimes our best parenting happens by negative example, I suppose. Still, I'm sorry you had to find your voice without my support. That night, driving back to the governor's mansion, I reflected on the extraordinary journey of the past 6 months. The family I had once fled was slowly becoming a family I might actually want to be part of. Not perfect, not instantly healed, but at least honest about our shared wounds, and committed to moving forward with greater awareness. My phone buzzed with a text from Elizabeth. How was family dinner night? I smiled, typing back, imperfect, awkward, real, progress. Her response came quickly, the best kind. The truth was, the courthouse revelation that I had dreaded had ultimately been liberating. By bringing my two separate lives into alignment, I had freed myself from the exhausting work of compartmentalization. I was no longer Alexandra, the disappointing daughter, or Governor Armstrong, the public servant. I was both, with all the complexity that entailed. More importantly, I had finally stopped seeking validation from people who had been unable to provide it. My worth wasn't determined by my mother's approval, my sister's envy, or even my father's belated pride. It came from living authentically, using my abilities to serve others, and remaining true to my values even when it would be easier to compromise. The most powerful lesson of all was that success isn't about proving critics wrong or winning some imaginary competition. It's about becoming fully yourself, embracing your gifts without apology, and using them purposefully. I had spent years hiding my light, first to avoid criticism, then to avoid confrontation. Now I understood that visibility, while sometimes uncomfortable, created possibility not just for me, but for others who might see themselves in my journey. As I arrived home, I thought about Sophia asking to interview me for her school project. Perhaps that was the most meaningful victory of all, that my niece could now see a different path than the one that had led her mother astray. The cycle of dysfunction that had defined our family for generations might finally be breaking. The next morning, I would return to the business of governing, tackling budget negotiations, policy initiatives, and the 1,000 daily decisions that came with leadership. But I would do so as a whole person, no longer fragmented between family expectations and professional identity. The road ahead with my family would still have bumps and detours. Diana might never fully acknowledge her role in our dysfunction. Melanie's rehabilitation would face challenges and setbacks. Timothy's newfound voice might falter at times. But we were finally walking a path of authenticity together, however imperfectly. That night I slept more peacefully than I had in years. No longer the family failure or the secret success, but simply Alexandra, governor and daughter, sister and aunt, imperfect and whole. Have you ever had to hide your success from family who never believed in you? Or have you experienced that moment when someone who dismissed you finally saw your true value? Share your story in the comments. And if this resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear that their worth isn't determined by family approval. Remember, sometimes the people who should support you the most see you the least clearly, but that doesn't diminish your light. Thank you for listening to my story, and whatever journey you're on, I wish you the courage to live authentically, even when it's difficult.